Hey, everybody, what's up? It's your boy MJ, and welcome to the Black Wine Guy Experience. My guest today is a fifth generation winemaker of, how do you say that?
Azelia.
Azelia. Whenever I just let my guest do it because it's a historical and small family-run winery founded in 1920 in
Lorenzo
Castiglione
Falletto.
in the heart of the Barolo. I know Barolo, guys. Barolo region in Piedmont, Italy. Everybody say hello to Lorenzo Scavino. Lorenzo attended the Oenological School in Alba, which is the most prestigious wine school in Italy. He graduated summa cum laude with the title of, go figure, Oenologist. Lorenzo works full-time alongside his father, Luigi, at
Azelia.
I really need to work on my foreign language skill. Participating in every step of the process, from the work in the vineyards to the winemaking and sales management in Italy and around the world. Everybody, this is our first international winemaker. Please welcome Lorenzo Scavino.
Thank you, MJ. Wow, I'm excited. Your first international winemaker. That's great.
Yes. Yeah.
What a great start. Well done.
I know. I went right to the top. So, as I said, he's out in the market. He's got a grip of wine. He's got a bag full of wine. But I love Dolcetto. I think it's in the States. It's overlooked. You know, everybody drinks. I know it's not your region, but Chianti. You know what I'm saying? Everybody knows Sangiovese and they know Chianti. But I love Dolcetto. We have a Barbero. We have your Nebbiolo, which is not obviously in the Barolo or Barbaresco region. I'll let him explain that to you guys. And then he brought a 2010 Reserva Barolo, so we got something special. So your boy might get a little bit tipsy, but let's start at the beginning. You're a fifth generation winemaker.
Yes.
What's it? I don't like. What's that like?
Well, it's not that easy, especially because I am an only child.
Oh, so there was
that's
no
even
fallback.
Worse.
Yeah.
That's even worse.
Yeah.
That's why I say no pressure. It's really a huge responsibility. But, when you grow up in a wine family, it's always a different story.
Yeah.
Because when I was a small child, I used to play in the vineyards, in the cellar. At the beginning, it's like playing. Then it becomes like a real job. There's also some slavery in between, some child labor.
Yeah, child labor laws. Yeah.
But that's how it works, you know?
So, let's go back to the beginning. Who founded the winery back in 1920?
So everything started by my great-great-grandfather.
Great, okay.
And you have to consider that Piedmont was extremely poor back then. In the early 1900s, it was just like a small, typical Piedmontese farmhouse.
Mm.
My great-great-grandfather had all the animals, cows, horses. They had fruit trees also, so peaches, apples, that was their production. And they already had vineyards, smaller quantities of grapes just for the family, for a few friends. But at the beginning, they weren't even making wine.
Okay.
Because at that time, it was quite unusual. You know, they were just making extremely small quantities for the family, but that was it.
Right.
Then, after a while, they started to realize that in the Lange region, where I live, we have such a unique soil composition. We have these hills, which are so beautiful with amazing exposures to the sunlight. So they were like, let's start vinifying these grapes. My great-great-grandfather was actually one of the very first who started in the area. With the purpose of really vinifying his own production of grapes. It wasn't easy at the beginning because, as I say, Piedmont was extremely poor. Just think about buying all the equipment in the cellar to make wine. It was something big, but it had a great success. Little by little, more people started to come into the yard because they wanted to buy wine as it was good. So it was able to increase, to buy more land, and to focus only on vineyards.
Mm-hmm.
But it took a while. After him, a few decades later, my great-grandfather started bottling the wine for the very first time. Because back then, everything was sold in bulk.
Okay.
And it was, again, one of the first in the
So
era.
people would buy like a barrel? They'd buy
Yes. They were very common in Piemonte. These glass containers called damigiane,
Okay.
the damigians, where people were just buying wine and they were bottling it at home.
Okay.
It was just easier for them. My great grandfather started with bottles, glass bottles, which were uncommon, very uncommon. He started using, corks, labels. It was something nobody used at that time. Huge investment because it was really, really difficult back then. Families were starving to death at that time.
Yeah.
They were all farmers. Families were very big, like 10 children each. So it wasn't that easy. But he was very brave, very, I think, also open-minded. Being, at that time in the early 1900s, he was very, very unusual.
Yeah, I can only imagine, because we think, all these countries were still kind of young, right? So this is Italy's been through 2 world wars, but and before that there was a lot of poverty. I think people don't understand. We see TV here and we see Italy. It's beautiful and the restaurants, but it was a developing nation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and it took a while, to develop such a wine region.
Yeah. And so that was your great great grandfather who started using labels and corks, right?
Yes.
Okay. And so then there's so many greats. So then it's a lot to process. Like the people here in the United States, we don't know who are, we could look it up if we go on ancestries.com, but we don't have direct ties to like our great, so that's also something that's really cool.
Yeah, but you did have them, right?
Yeah, I'm here. There's proof of life. So, and I'm like, this is a lot for me to process. Like, I'm trying to ask questions. And I didn't even drink on the last show. So this is, again, there's no DOC, no DOCG.
Back then, not yet.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
It was totally different. Even Barolo wasn't called Barolo yet.
Right.
It was a totally different region. Also, just think about spreading the word. Back then, without, of course, the internet, without other ways without media, anything. Anything was more difficult because their neighbors, my great-great-grandparents' neighbors, they knew they were making wine. They started making wine, but not other people. Just think about transportation.
Yeah.
When my grandfather, not even my great-grandfather,
right.
my grandfather, so we're talking about not really many years ago, when he was young, he was like 18 years old or something, when he was able to sell his wines to Turin or to Milan, he was like exporting wines at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think that he was delivering a couple of cases of wine to Milano, riding his horse, and it took him a couple of days to go back and forth, that is really incredible.
Yeah, that is incredible. I had a little taste of what it was like because I got to interview Piero Master Berardino, and he had these documents like you had to get on a boat to come meet someone to maybe represent your wine in a different country.
Sure.
There's a story of he's got his horse in his cart and he's delivering the wine.
Yes.
And there's no paved roads. It's like we're so blessed we live at this time. So let's back up a little bit though, because I don't even know where to go. I'm just overwhelmed by the history. So you said you used to play in the vineyards and then it wasn't play, and I'm sure some child labor laws were broken. But what were you like? I mean, you were an only child. So what was it like being an only child? There's no neighborhood. Is there another farm adjacent? Did you have friends or
Yes, it's where I live, Castiglione Falletto, which is a small village in the very heart of the Barolo area.
Okay. We
are 700 people.
Wow.
That's it. All the rest is vineyards everywhere.
Okay.
So practically we're all related. It's the same family. No, but it's really a great community. When you grow up there, it's so different. Like my parents never forced me to be a winemaker, to become a winemaker. It was my choice. I decided to attend the Oenological School, the wine school, when I was 14. Quite young. It's a 6-year program, so it's pretty long. 6 years of viticulture, chemistry, and enology. I used to help even when I was attending the school. I already helped in the vineyards like during the afternoon. And then immediately after my graduation, I started working full time for the winery. You know, they needed help. Being an only child, they needed help.
Right.
So, especially in a small family-run winery like ours.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's how it started.
So what you studied chemistry, enology, and agronomy?
Yeah.
I know a lot of people know enology. Obviously, that's wine chemistry. What's agronomy?
Agronomy is about think about the vineyards.
Okay.
So viticulture, everything about the vineyards. And also, it's a good school. That's actually the oldest school in Italy. And it has its own winery and vineyards. So because not all the students are from wineries.
Oh, okay.
So you really have the opportunity to try to be a winemaker in their vineyards, in their cellar. It's a very good school. For me, it was different because, you know, having the winery at home with my father, my grandfather, my grandmother, it was a totally different experience. But still, the school is a very good base. It's very important. Long, but good.
Yeah. During those 6 years in school, I understand you used to travel. You got to travel to wineries in France and Spain. What did you take from those visiting other wineries in different countries and different wine regions around the world?
Well, it was a great experience. I was still quite young back then, but still it was a great experience because even countries which are so close to ours, like France and Spain, they have such differences compared to our winemaking, compared to our viticulture in the vineyards. So it was very interesting for me as a young student to see what they were doing different compared to my home. So it was very, very interesting, especially because we visited bigger wineries, smaller wineries, pretty much everything with the school. And it was interesting to see huge realities which we don't have in Italy. That was very interesting. What I learned the most, I think, is probably the fact that I have to respect what my ancestors did. Not many families, because I had the opportunity also to meet so many winemakers from other wineries, other estates, and not many families have such history.
Yeah.
And we're here thanks to my great-great-grandparents who decided to work the land. And at that time, you have to consider that working the land, being a farmer, was an inferior job. And nobody wanted to do that. All the new generations wanted to leave. They wanted to be employed in Torino or Milano, the biggest, closest cities, because they didn't want to be farmers. It was like very inferior to be that. And now it's like the other way around.
Well, now it's sexy.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, and even here in the United States, people are like, oh, I'm going to start a winery in Napa. You know, I'm going to, it's become just like, it's so funny what you said. It's just like polenta was like peasant food, and now it costs like $30.
Exactly,
like
very
fine
true.
Restaurant, you know what I mean?
Yes, it's crazy.
And also, though, I mean, I think about even with the machinery you have, like how hard work, but you're talking like a mule, and you're like hot sun, just that's hard work.
My great-great-grandparents were working in their vineyards with oxen.
Yeah.
And that is, if you think about it, that's really, I mean, nowadays we have all the machineries that we want, even if it's still mostly by hand, because in Piedmont, in Barolo, we have very steep hills.
Yeah.
So, like in the Reserva vineyard, in the Bricco Voghera, the top rows are so steep that it's too dangerous to drive a tractor there. So it's totally by hand. That's a crazy amount of work. And that's really like it was in the past. It was really like that, but for the whole area, like in all the vineyards, it was all by hand.
Yeah. Is that a thing with Italians? Because the Italians, a lot of Italian, California wine owes a lot to Italian immigrants. And there's a winery called Martinelli. They have a vineyard. It's called Jackass Hill, because you would have to be a jackass. Like you can't put a trap. Like you'd have to like. Is that why would someone plant on a steep, dangerous hill?
Because it's the most beautiful exposure. It receives more heat, more sunlight. Usually, the most difficult plots to farm are the best ones. It's always like that, unfortunately. It's always like that. And also, the highest part of the hills, the hilltops, are the best positions. And that's, of course, the hardest part to farm.
Yeah.
But the hilltop always receives more sunlight and also more wind, which is very important in Barolo, to push away the humidity. Because we can have a lot of pressure with diseases, powdery mildew, downy mildew. We want to avoid the humidity. And so the hilltops are really ideal for that.
Gotcha. So you were at the school in Alba for 6 years. But I think like you're 14 when you start. That's amazing. Whereas
it was a bit illegal, to drink wine at that time.
Yeah. Well, no,
just a bit. But
so
I was already drinking wine. I mean, I started when I was 5 or 6 years old. So for me, it was just, normal to drink wine at that time.
That's what
By the time I was 14, it was like,
like that's what I understand. Like when you grow up in the culture, it's a little bit different. Like, they give you a little bit with your dinner just because, that's what everybody else is doing. Sure. So you graduated summa cum laude, so you were like the top student. What drove you to work so hard? Like, I mean, because you could be like, we've been doing this for I'm the 5th generation. I got this. I could coast,
That's my father. That's my boss.
Okay.
That's his fault. Yeah, for sure.
Talk about that. What is your dad like, man?
Well, he's so demanding. I must say he's a terrible perfectionist. He pays attention to any small detail, which really makes a huge difference for him. That's why it's not so easy to work with him. You have to get used to it little by little. It takes a while. And he really wants to do things his way. He always has the final say, of course. But I think he can, that's pretty fair because he has a crazy experience. This year, it's going to be his 44th harvest.
Wow.
So, I mean, almost 45 vintages. That is incredible.
Yeah.
He has already experienced everything in the past. Warmer years, colder years, extreme droughts, humid vintages. And since we're farmers, he's always able to adapt the works in the vineyards. But to work with him, to live with him, it's a big family affair. And especially, I don't know, he's never satisfied, especially with my work or I'm quite used to it now, but at the beginning it's tough.
Yeah.
You have to really build your character. And it's
and that could be tough because typically what would happen outside the wine business, like your parents would build your character so you go out in the world to get beat up by your boss. But your boss is the one who's building your character but knows where he left all the flaws that he can beat you up some more, it seems like.
Exactly.
It's like not really fair.
And especially, being an only child, it's always my fault.
Well, you don't have anyone else to blame.
Exactly.
Lorenzo, I mean,
that's the thing.
You're screwed, man.
I think that when I started working full-time for the winery, after my graduation, he was like, "You're not going to ruin our wines in the cellar." And so you have to start in the vineyards only. So for the first 3 years, I was working full-time in the vineyards only, not in the cellar. Mm-hmm. He didn't trust me.
Well, that's interesting because a lot of my American winemakers say the wine's made in the vineyard and you just, you got good fruit, just don't fuck it up in the cellar. But that's interesting that he's like, no, just go out there with the grapes.
Exactly. And those are, the vineyards are the hardest part of our job.
Yeah.
Working, we can have 100 degrees in the summer, steep hills running up and down. We can have a meter of snow in the winter. while we're pruning with the snow at our knees. It's, huge shifts and long hours in the vineyards. It's farmer's life, so it's tough. But I think that that was really a great start for me, because I was working at that time alongside with my grandmother.
Okay.
And so there was really a priceless education in the vineyards. My grandmother and Angela, this woman has worked for us for almost 50 years. So I had these two bosses in the vineyards, my grandma and Angela, who really taught me everything about the vineyards. It was really, really wonderful. Tough, but wonderful.
There's a theme here, man. It was rough to be an only child, fifth generation winemaker. So there's a lot of history in your region too. I understand that during World War II, how did they hide the wine? Because this was a thing all over Europe, where the Nazi, where they were just taking everybody's wine. Like, how did your family, or how did your commune, how did they deal with that threat?
That was my family actually experienced two world wars, the first and the second. So because they were making wine already, especially for World War II, where we have more records coming from the family and the great grandparents. They still managed to make wine even during the war. It wasn't that easy because working out in the vineyards, it wasn't that safe. Some of the areas in Barolo were bombed.
Wow.
We had the Germans in the area, we had the partisans, so it was really pretty tough moment, especially during those years. Some of the vineyards were turned into battlefields. They still managed to make some wine, not like the standard quantity, but they still managed to make some. We have the oldest bottles that we have in our private collection are from 1932.
Okay.
So those bottles survived the war. And they were hidden by my great-great-grandparents during the war in fake walls in the cellar underground in order to keep them safe away from Germans who were there to steal the bottles, to break them. That's really a fantastic collection. I mean, it's amazing to be able to still have those bottles, which are still drinkable.
Right.
Because Barolo is one of the most age-worthy wines on the planet. You can keep it almost as long as you want.
See, they're representing this whole region, man. No, that actually is true. And particularly, we'll get into this later, but like back then, they would use the big Slovenian, like those wines were like Titanic. Like they needed like 25 years. Like, okay, it's okay. You might want to drink it,
Yes, it was a totally different style. Barolo was super tannic, powerful. You really needed to wait for 10 or 15 or 20 years before drinking it. Yeah. Also because not just because of the aging, but also because of the fermentations. Just think about the fact that it was impossible back then to control the temperature during the alcoholic fermentation. They didn't have temperature control tanks, of course, at that time. So in very warm vintages, they had the alcoholic fermentation going up to over 40 Celsius, which is, too high at that. It was really extracting everything. Or on the other side, when it was a colder vintage, it was really hard to have the fermentations going on for the entire process until the end. So it was very, very tricky. And that's why Barolo had a different style back then. They had so few tools to control the quality in the vineyards and in the cellar.
And speaking of the vineyards, you're in Falletto, correct?
Castiglione. Say the first word,
Okay.
which is more difficult.
I know. I'm cheating.
Castiglione Falletto.
Castiglione Falletto. But actually, aren't almost all of your family's vineyards in Serralunga de Alba?
Yes.
Okay.
Bravo.
I know a little bit, man. So, like, your name is Scavino.
Yeah.
And there's some other famous Scavinos, right?
Sure. We
Are you guys related?
We are related. Yes, we're cousins. Yes, sure. As I told you, in Castiglione Falletto,
Well, 700
if you have
people.
the same, yes,
Yeah.
we were all related.
Yeah, it's kind of short.
Yeah. Such a small area.
Yeah. And you guys share ownership of
Bricco Fiasco, yes, which is our historical vineyard of the family in the Castiglione, right, very close to our winery. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's really in the heart of the Barolo area.
Okay.
It's a beautiful vineyard.
And so, what wines do you produce out of that vineyard? Also Nebbiolo or just Barbera and Dolcetto?
Out of that vineyard,
Yeah.
it's only Barolo.
Okay.
Yes, only Barolo. It's all Nebbiolo because that's really the center of the Barolo production. So it's which is tiny. I mean, that vineyard, we own about 2.5 hectares, so we make 5,000 to 6,000 bottles.
Okay.
It's pretty small.
Yeah, yeah. So it's just, I'm glad you're on because I've been doing this thing with some friends of mine down in Jersey who they have a shop and all they sell is Italian wines, a restaurant. Shout out to Biravino. And Italy's home to like, how many different indigenous grape varietals are there in Italy?
We have so many hundreds.
Don't you have a degree in this stuff? Summa cum laude. But it's over. It's in the hundreds, right? Yeah.
It's definitely. I think it's close to 1,000.
Wow. And we know Nebbiolo, we know Barbera, Dolcetto. Are there any other grapes in your region that?
Yes, of course the most typical grapes are for sure Dolcetto, Barbera, and Nebbiolo, the most historical ones. We have many other grapes which were slightly, I would say, more common in the past. Then they disappeared because they were less cultivated, like Fresa, Nascetta, Grignolino. We have many. But Nebbiolo is for sure the oldest one. It was born in Piedmont, and it's actually one of the oldest varieties on Earth. Okay. There are traces of Nebbiolo vines planted in our region in 1200s. So that is, if you think about it, that is unbelievable.
Yeah.
That's why Nebbiolo really requires our soils, our weather to grow at its best. Nowadays you can find Nebbiolo vines planted all over the world. Here in the US, in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa. But actually, if you taste the wine, it's very hard to recognize it because it's completely different. Nebbiolo really requires Piedmont. And we're so proud of that.
I can you see a smile on his face. I mean, but that goes to sense of place or terroirs, it's called, right? Like it just you can grow lots of things, lots of places, but where is it at its purest expression?
Yes.
Yeah, and that would be this very unique place. So now I'm like, so you have any cousins over at the Paolo Scavino estate there?
Yes, I have 2 cousins.
See, and do you bitch them about being an only child and they're lucky because there's at least 2 of them?
Well, sometimes they get there are 2, so it's they can divide. It's we always have so much fun together because it's a great family. We get along. So we share. Sometimes we work together. Also, we have fun together. So it's really a great community. We live very close to each other, and it's funny because we sometimes see each other more often abroad doing events, tastings, rather than at home because we're always running here and there. So that is very funny. Yeah, it's. And we're always eating and drinking together, of course. It's a part of our job. Yeah. We have to.
I know. That's what I tell people. You don't understand. That's what I have to do. So I'm have this. What do I have? I have the Dolcetto. Talk to me about the 2019 Dolcetto a little bit, man.
Dolcetto d'Alba. That's our everyday wine in Piedmont. So it's very fresh, fruity, flowery, good to be enjoyed young. Ours is a particular Dolcetto, Bricco dell'Oriolo. That's the name of the vineyard.
Okay.
So it's actually a single vineyard, Dolcetto, not blended. And the vines are 55 years old, which is very unusual for a Dolcetto. Normally, Dolcetto comes from younger vines. But my father is very, I told you, is very picky, terrible perfectionist. Even for the base wines, he wants to have older vines. He only wants to work with older vines. So even in Dolcetto, we have this concentration, this intensity, which is very particular.
Yeah, I'm saying it's not. I mean, Dolcetto. This is delicious, but like you said, it's just lighter.
Yeah.
This has great acid, but it's typically a lighter, fresher thing. If you've never tried a Dolcetto, think like a Cru Beaujolais almost. It's kind of like that character, but this is deep. It's got some serious complexity going on in it.
I always say that Dolcetto is our pizza wine.
Yeah.
Because you can just pair it with whatever you prefer goes well with it. Even by itself, a little bit chilled, it's very refreshing. Or antipasti, starters, appetizers, that's just perfect. It's so versatile.
Yeah.
And this Dolcetto is on top of a hill facing full south. It's very normally Dolcetto, because Dolcetto is the cheapest grape in Barolo, in the area, we have to say that. And normally it has the worst locations because that's what remains for Dolcetto. The best ones are for Nebbiolo and Barbera.
Yeah.
So normally you would have Dolcetto at the bottom of a hill facing north. That's not really the best ripening. Actually, Dolcetto needs the same amount of sunlight of Nebbiolo to ripen at its best. Here with this vineyard, Bricco dell'Oriolo, we are a little bit outside of the Barolo area. It's another village called Montelupo Albese.
Montelupo Albese.
Bravo.
I have to do it right
You're
away.
Learning.
I am. I'm not going to waste this time.
And in Montelupo Albese, since it's outside of the Barolo area, there is no Nebbiolo. So we can use the best positions for Dolcetto. That's why top of a hill, full south. It's like a Barolo position.
I like that. Let me use that one. It's like a Barolo position. There's, so let's talk about your father for a few moments here, which he's obviously inside of the theme. But you said he has this older vines, even for like this Dolcetto. Has he shared with you what it was like when he took over from his father? Like, what changes did he institute into the winery, the viticultural practices, and what do you know to be his contributions to where you're about to take off from eventually?
He did. Maybe. I think I have to wait at least another 30 years before taking over, because my father will never retire. And I'm actually very happy with that. At least we can share responsibilities. No, my dad did so many things when he took over. I think he took over he was about my age, like 30 or something. He did so many things. My grandfather was a very open-minded man.
Okay.
Which I think it runs in the family, like also in the blood. It's also my great-great-grandfather. It's always been like that. Always pioneers, visionary, doing new things which other people weren't doing. And my grandfather was already experimenting a lot. When my father took over, he started experimenting even more. He started introducing, I remember that's really probably one of the first things he started doing when he took over. He started grain harvesting, which at that time was very unusual. He started reducing the yields in the summer. After a trip to France, he saw that some of the growers there in France were grain harvesting, meaning that they were cutting some of the clusters during the summer before the real harvest in order to just leave them on the ground as natural fertilizers. But the main purpose was to concentrate the grapes which were remaining in order to have a better ripening, better balance, elegance, finesse. And so my dad had a trip to France and he saw that. And he came back with this idea in mind. Also because since my grandparents had fruit trees, they were producing peaches, apples. It's funny to think that they were already doing that with fruit trees. They were reducing the amount of apples or peaches per each tree so that the ones remaining were sweeter, tastier. But they were not doing that with vines.
See, that's interesting. I didn't realize. I mean, that makes sense. Here in the States, they call it dropping fruit. Like they drop fruit. You want to reduce the yields. I had no idea, but it makes sense that like you would drop peaches, you would drop apples, so you get riper, more luscious fruit.
Yes. And the interesting thing is that they were not doing that with vines.
Yeah,
because at that time it was especially with vines, which had a more limited, let's say, market.
Yeah,
grapes. It was important to have the biggest possible yield.
Right.
And so that's why they were really trying to produce as much as possible. With fruit trees, it was a different thing because they had a bigger market, so they really wanted to have the best fruit to sell. That was the difference.
Yeah.
And my father was like, why don't we try with vines, with grapes? And at that time, they were still very, the region was still very poor. My grandfather, my grandmother were not that happy because dropping fruits, dropping grapes at that time was like throwing away money.
That's money
on the ground.
Yeah.
Yes. It was something, something like, are you out of your mind or what happened? But my father, being so stubborn already, he was like, let's try at least in some vineyards. He started doing that. My grandfather was pretty upset, disappointed. But then after tasting the first vintage, the first result, he was extremely happy because the wine was completely different. It was more balanced. It was actually sweeter in the sense of the tannins. The tannins were smoother, more integrated in the structure of the wine, and he was not expecting that, my grandfather. And so the year after that, my father started dropping fruits, started green harvesting.
Green harvesting, I like that.
In all his vineyards. And that was a sort of innovation in Piedmont, in Barolo.
I was going to ask you, what did in addition to your grandparents, were your neighbors like, they're crazy over there? What's going on with those Scavinos?
Yes, especially the old generations, who were more close-minded. They were really thinking like that. And it took years and years because nowadays it's just normal to drop fruits.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody does that, literally.
Yeah.
But at that time, it took years and years. And my father was not really the first one, but it was in a group of these very first producers who started doing that. And it was brave because...
Again, like you said, I mean, it literally is money on the ground.
Yeah.
And you have to recoup that later. But I love the story about how your grandfather just loved the wines.
Yes, that was so satisfying also for my father because, doing something, it was affecting the entire family. It wasn't that easy.
Now, your father, is he an only child as well, or does he have...
He has a sister.
Okay.
Yes, and she used to work for the winery as well with the family. She's now retired.
Okay.
She's just enjoying wine. We're making wine and she's drinking wine. My aunt, yeah.
That's great. That's great.
Yes.
Okay, so
and also another thing my father did after the green harvest, he started introducing the small barrels, the barriques.
Okay, so he's one of those generations who went to. I read the articles. Like, there's a few renegades. They're like, because they went to Burgundy.
Yes, that's it.
Yeah.
That's it. Because barriques nobody used barriques in Italy. They were just being used in France at that time. And so my father was really experimenting a lot with these smaller barrels. Barolo was born in botti, in the big barrels. So again, it was something pretty strange to use these smaller containers, which were actually more spicy because the bigger the cask, the smaller the ratio wine to the wood. So that's why usually the big barrels, the botti, are less predominant on the wine. Normally you would taste the barrique a lot more because it's a smaller container. At that time when barriques were introduced in Piedmont, and we're talking about 30 or 35 years ago, everybody was experimenting. 100% new oak, 50% new oak, 80%, 30, because they didn't know. My father actually never used too much new oak. I think it was about 30% at his maximum, because he always wanted to respect the raw materials, the grapes, and yes, he's been experimenting a lot with that, and also with so many other equipments in the cellar, like particular crushing machines, particular presses, pumps. Pumps in the cellar are, think about every time we have to move the wine from one tank to the other, from tank to barrel, we use a pump.
Mm-hmm.
And so the quality of the pump is essential.
Mm-hmm.
He started using these particular pumps, which are called peristaltic pumps, which are super soft. Because every time you move the wine, it's a stress for the wine. And these peristaltic pumps, which are crazy expensive, they are small, and it's like buying a crazy expensive car.
Yeah.
So, and you look at them and you're like, really? That is the cost? But they work very well. They have a sort of silicone tube which presses the wine through. There are no metal parts in contact to the wine.
Okay.
It's super soft. During the harvest, we can even pump grapes, berries, perfectly intact without crushing the berries.
Wow.
Yeah. That's a great help to be gentle on the berries.
Right.
It's actually the same system used to pump the blood from surgeons when they operate to the heart. Yeah.
You said something that reminded me of something when I first came to my business, that like another, I think it was, I don't know, was it Trimbach, somebody, but like what you said, every time you move the wine, you're messing with it at a molecular level, so you want to be as gentle as possible.
Very important.
Yeah.
Very important.
Yeah.
And also for the same thing, when you bottle the wine, immediately after the bottling, the wine has to rest a little bit, because it's always a stress for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
These are small details which really make a big difference.
Mm-hmm. So what else did your crazy dad do there? The rebel of the region.
Do we have enough time?
Yeah, we got time.
He's been also experimenting a lot in the vineyards, also in the selection of the clones for the new vines, which we are always replacing when the old ones die. He's been experimenting a lot with new Nebbiolo clones, which we actually don't like, because when you plant a new vine, then maybe you like it at first, but then you have to think about the evolution of the wine, especially for Barolo, which can be kept forever. Maybe you like it when it's young, but you don't like it anymore when it gets old. So think about, when you plant a new vine, it takes 4 years before the first harvest. Then the evolution of the wine, it takes forever. And he started when he was about 30 years old, when he took over planting new Nebbiolo clones. And he realized that just by following the evolution of the wine, that he really doesn't like these new clones, because the final result, the wine, is completely different. It gets darker, which Nebbiolo isn't. Also, these clones, of course, are more resistant. They're stronger, more resistant, with diseases in the vineyards. It's easier to farm them. But also they have tannins, which are harsher. It's difficult to have to achieve a complete phenolic ripening. So nowadays we just use our original old clones, which are Lampia and Miquette.
Lampia and Miquette.
Yes.
All right, I just poured. I'm giving everybody an Italian wine lesson. So, sorry for moving the mic, everybody. I need to be professional. So now I'm on the Barbera di Alba. Most of my listeners are from the United States. I'm sure we're going to get a big spike in Italy because you're on. But talk about, like Dolcetto, you said was like the village wines, the pizza wines. Talk about Barbera's status inside of Piedmont.
Barbera has been one of the most planted, if not, I would say the most planted grape variety in Piemonte for so many years.
Okay.
Yeah. Very typical wine. I would consider it as another everyday wine, just like Dolcetto, but very different. If you look at the color, Barbera is always darker, very purple, very intense, and that's genetics. Because in the cellar we have the same process, the same fermentation, maceration. Barbera is just darker, and also has a higher acidity, which provides a great freshness in your mouth, and it has almost no tannins. So it's like opposite to Nebbiolo. For everyday drinking, it's perfect because like the Dolcetto, it's easy to pair. It's easy to pair. Of course, we have our typical pairings, our pasta pairings in Piedmont. But the Barbera, with this acidity, which really is helpful to clean your mouth while you're eating, again, just like the Dolcetto, drink it with whatever you prefer.
I had a question because I'm sitting here with a real Italian from Piedmont. What is like your regional cuisine there? I mean, because I watch TV shows and they say this, but like you live it, you've lived it.
We have an incredible cuisine in Piemonte. It's really amazing. We have our typical antipasti. The vitello tonnato is one of the most famous for sure, and it's probably, well, not probably, it's definitely my favorite Piemontese dish. Which is, it sounds like a strange pairing if you have never had it. I can translate it as tuna veal.
Okay.
So it's a sort of veal similar to a roast beef, but it's not.
Okay.
It's similar with sauce. It's a mayonnaise with tuna, capers, and anchovies. It's a very particular pairing because think about tuna and veal. I mean,
yeah,
nobody does that.
We call it surf and turf here, man. You can get it at the Sizzler for $12.99.
It's a little bit different.
Yeah,
here.
I think it probably. You think? So, for instance, I never like that. I love that you share that. Like I've never seen on all these shows where people go to Piedmont. I've never heard about this dish.
Yeah, the vitello tonnato is definitely one of the most famous. And anywhere you go, the recipe is always a little bit different. The veal is always different. The sauce is always different. So I have so many friends who are also obsessed with vitello tonnato like me. And so we're always touring around the entire area, entire Piemonte region to always try new, different recipes for vitello tonnato. It's a hard job, but we do it. So.
Yeah, man. It's tough.
Vitello tonnato. Then we have, another typical antipasto is the carne cruda, which is actually the raw meat. This is very simple. It's raw meat. We have a very particular breed in Piemonte, which is called Fassone. And it's this famous meat, which is very lean, but very tasty at the same time. Only in Piemonte. And we eat it raw. It's super tasty. It's gorgeous. Just some olive oil, some salt, and pepper if you like. It's usually the real recipe. It's cut with a knife by hand. So it's like in very, very small, tiny pieces. It's super good.
All right. Well, then we've had some antipasta. What's next?
And then we have pasta.
Yeah.
Of course. Yeah. Pasta. There is such a variation of in Piemonte for sure. Agnolotti del Plin, which is this filled pasta with this meat and vegetable filling. They are incredible. Every grandma makes agnolotti del Plin at home. Again, with different fillings, different recipes. You can add a little bit of parmesan in the filling, more vegetables, more meat. 3 different meats. It's usually beef, rabbit, and pork with different proportions. And it's always a secret recipe, you know,
of
from
course.
the grandma.
It's grandma. She's not.
Yes. And it's this fresh egg pasta. They are gorgeous. They're gorgeous. Just super simple. You boil them with, and then you add some butter and sage. Super simple. It's really fantastic.
Did your grandma make?
Of course, yes.
Was your favorite, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I was also making this
with
pasta.
Her?
Yes, with her. Yeah, it's great. It takes forever because to make like a bottle of the agnolotti takes like half a day, but it's so worth it.
Yeah.
And then we have the tagliarin, which is another pasta.
Okay.
Tagliarin, they're like very thin spaghetti, but it's egg pasta. It's fresh pasta. Normally, the original recipe, it's 40 yolks per kilo of flour. Practically, they are like almost, I wouldn't say red, but orange.
Yeah.
This pasta is so intense, but so good. Yeah.
And
With the ragu sauce.
And what type of ragu is there typical? Is it like, I know some regions have wild boar. Is there a typical ragu?
Wild
rabbit,
boar.
Or
Wild boar, we have that mostly in the winter. We would eat it with wild boar ragu. Otherwise, beef with always the fassona. That's like the perfect one. It's lighter, really. That's what I prefer.
Yeah. And what else? Give me one more.
I'm getting hungry here.
I know. I am. I'm definitely coming to visit. You're going to take me all these places.
Yes, you have to. Well, you have to come hungry. In Barolo, the restaurant scene is incredible. Anywhere you go, and it's restaurant, like every house is either a restaurant or a winery.
Oh, wow.
So it's really like that. And anywhere you go, even like the small locande, osterie, trattorie, the quality is unbelievable, really.
Yeah.
So after the pasta, we have the meat, of course. We have, the most typical, I would say, is the braised meat.
Okay.
Brasato al Barolo, which is a super tender braised meat in Barolo. It just melts in your mouth. It's like super soft, super tender.
How do you stay so fit, man?
We're working in the vineyards, so running up and down those steep hills.
That's right. You got the steep hills.
That's
you're an only child. Yeah, so you're doing, got it.
That's a total body workout, resistance training, whatever you call it. It works.
We got to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more Lorenzo. So we'll be right back. Okay, so we're just getting workout tips from Lorenzo on total bottle workouts. We should. You know what we could do, man? Listen, ideas. All right, so we're like new best friend. You're my new best Italian friend. We're gonna do we'll do harvest boot camp. Like we'll bring people over.
I love that. Right? We need more workers.
Exactly right. Exactly. We'll get people. We'll get people to pay us to come work your vineyards.
To lift crates of grapes.
Exactly.
That would be something. I'm ready. My father will love that too, I think. During the harvest, we're always in a hurry, like crazy, like totally. If you come during the harvest, we seem like I don't know, out of our minds because when we decide that we have to pick a vineyard, my father can wait for not a couple of days, a couple of hours.
Yeah,
and then we have to pick.
That. Yeah, because I've heard I've heard like there's certain regions, like if you don't pick the grapes, like you're like the alcohol levels get out of control. Like there's these, I don't be like what's the window for like picking grapes for like what's the window for picking like Barbera, Dolcetto, and then we'll get into Nebbiolo. What's that like? Because harvest is crazy. It's just like 30 days of hell for most people. Yeah,
also because you've been working an entire year for that,
right?
And you can damage everything.
Right.
It's first of all the decision of the picking date is crazy, because there you really determine the quality of the grapes. If you pick too early, the tannins are green; they are not fully ripe, and they will never ripen in the bottle. If you pick too late, then the wines will be over extracted, too jammy. We don't like that. So prior to the harvest, my father and I always walk in all our vineyards to taste the grapes. That's the old method. My father really prefers the old methods.
What do you taste for in a grape?
We taste the grapes. We taste the sweetness of the grapes. But it's more important to look at the color of the seeds. Okay. They must be dark brown. that means that the tannins are fully ripe. If they are still light brown, you don't have to pick them. Then you have to chew the seeds with your teeth, and there is a particular taste which tells you that the tannins are ripe. It's not easy because, I mean, it's a seed, so it will always be bitter, but you have to really train yourself. There's really this particular taste which tells you, okay, you can pick. I'm telling you all these tricks now. You can
Don't worry, man. I live in Jersey. It's not really going to help me grow any grapes. Definitely not in Nebbiolo. Maybe some sweet off hybrid grapes, but don't worry. Your family's domain and secrets are safe. Yeah, okay. You're good to go. Until your father hears it, he's like, you told him all our secrets.
Right, exactly. Exactly. He's going to be mad. And then we also do chemical analysis, like sugars, anthocyanins, pH, everything. But my father always prefers the old method.
So that's what you learned in school. Right. And then he's like, I don't need that.
Exactly.
I got to appear, yeah.
Exactly. It's always like that. It's always like that.
All right. So then, like, you guys, it's time to pick grapes. What happens?
Hell. Those are really like crazy days.
Like, do you start early in the morning? Some people, I know, do you harvest at night? Is like depending on the grape.
There's no need in Piedmont to harvest at night.
Okay.
Because especially these grape varieties are not subject to oxidation, at least as much as the white ones.
Yeah.
So there's no need. Normally we start quite early in the morning. Can be depending if it's also depending on the season, on the vintage. Can be 6:30, can be 7 a.m. And we have older people there, our workers who are very well trained. We're about 30 people, 35, 25 depending. And they're all well trained because we do a hand selection in the vineyards. So we examine all the bunches one by one in order to eliminate any green or damaged berry. And then we place them in these small little crates of 18 kilos each. Super small. And that's really the worst way to do it because you could also use bigger containers. And instead of using 150 smaller crates, you can use one big container. So imagine the number of times that we move these little crates. It's crazy, like 50 times each. Yeah. But that's in order to avoid to crush the berries in the vineyards. Because if you use a bigger container, of course, all the grapes, the clusters at the bottom, they're all crushed already. And at the bottom, you would have a lot of juice, which is actually, by the time it reaches the winery, it can be oxidated, especially if it's a warmer season. And we want to avoid that. That's why we use these smaller containers.
Now, was that something your father started, or that just was adopted region-wide?
It was already, my grandfather and great-grandfather were already using smaller containers. Yes, they were already kind of ahead of time, yeah. And then we bring these grapes back home to the winery. Again, we do another selection. So we have a sorting table. We make sure to use just the very best berries. We eliminate any leaf, which is maybe in between. And then we crush the grapes gently because we never want to break the skins too much. And then we place them in the fermentation tanks. Longer fermentations for Barolo, shorter for the base wines, Dolcetto, Barbera, and Langhe Nebbiolo. But those days are crazy because they are never ending, really. We start, can be 7:30 a.m., and we continue picking that vineyard until it's finished. And it can be 7 in the evening, can be 10 at night. And also, when we are back home after the vineyard, it's not finished because my father wants to crush the grapes the same day they are picked. We don't want to leave them overnight, always to avoid the oxidation. And so we may continue until midnight, 1 a.m. in the cellar crushing grapes. And the morning after, 6:30, we are in the vineyards. And it's like that for like 2 months. You can only imagine, September and October. Of course, we have some breaks in between the varieties, Dolcetto to Barbera and then to Nebbiolo, so at least we can catch our breath. But then it's really... It's not just hard as a physical work, but also mentally. because after an entire year of work, you can really damage everything. You can have a hailstorm, which in literally 30 seconds can ruin your entire crop. So
that is so now I just poured a little bit of your 2020 Nebbiolo. So Nebbiolo, Americans, we like our grape varietals. You know, it's hard for us sometimes with like our regions. You know, so Nebbiolo is a grape that is used in Barolo and Barbaresco. Why is this a Nebbiolo and not a Barolo?
It's a Nebbiolo Langhe, even if it could be a Barolo.
Okay.
It's our choice, actually.
Okay.
Because these vineyards come from the Barolo area.
Okay.
Castiglione Falletto, that you've
Castiglione
learned.
Falletto. Castiglione Falletto.
You can call it CF if you like.
Yeah. No, I listen. I love my New Jersey Italian accent. Castiglione Falletto
and Serralunga d'Alba.
Serralunga d'Alba,
which are in the Barolo area. So we could actually make a Barolo with these grapes.
Okay.
But our Langhe Nebbiolo comes from our youngest vines, which are 20 years old. So not that young. But that's too young for my dad to make a Barolo. So that's why every year we declass them from Barolo to Langhe Nebbiolo, a step lower in the denomination. So it's our choice. My father really wants to have this kind of freshness, which is ideal in Langhe Nebbiolo, approachability, drinkability, and with younger vines we can achieve that.
So I have listeners who are just, I have people who've been making wine for years and MWs, but there are people who just because I'm a goofball and I think I'm funny, listen to the podcast. Tell them about Nebbiolo as a grape.
Nebbiolo, we are so proud to have this grape in Piedmont. I mean, it's such a unique grape, which really reflects the location of the vineyard, the terroir, the soil composition, the microclimate. It's so specific, and it's so Piedmontese. It's so Piemonte. Nebbiolo is Piemonte. And there's no other grape like Nebbiolo, because Nebbiolo has power, structure due to the tannins, but at the same time it has acidity, freshness. It's very hard to find another variety on earth with these two features combined together. Usually you have either power or finesse, or freshness or structure. This is like a fusion of everything. And plus the aroma. The aroma is outstanding. Fresh fruits, fresh flowers, but it's really a mix of everything. Cherries, raspberries in particular for Nebbiolo. Raspberries like typical feature in Nebbiolo. And these fresh flowers like violets, roses, so typical. And Nebbiolo, of course, having all these tannins is not so easy to farm. Because the more tannins you have, the more difficulties you have to achieve the phenolic ripening. Also, Nebbiolo has the longest cycle in the vineyards. It's the first one, which starts
the bud break.
In the spring, and it's the last one that we pick. So it's also the most risky variety, because it can happen anything during such a long cycle. It's also more subject to diseases compared to other varieties, less resistant. But the good thing is that it has roots which go very deep into the soil.
Okay.
So it can be a very dry year, a very humid. Down there, Nebbiolo never suffers, with older vines, of course.
Very cool.
And you have all these different expressions of Nebbiolo, like the Langhe Nebbiolo that you're tasting right now. It's another everyday wine for us. Like the Berbere and the Dolcetto. Those are all everyday wines for us, because you drink it young, the year after the harvest. This is 2020, which is just perfect to drink now. And then you have the expressions of the Barolo, the Barbaresco, which are more intense, powerful. But I love the Langhe Nebbiolo for everyday drinking, not just for our typical pairings, but also for... I like to break the rules with pairings. So I like Langhe Nebbiolo with fish.
Mm-hmm.
I like it a lot.
I would say this. You look at the color. I mean, you can drink red Burgundy with fish, so it makes sense to me that you would this style. When was there like a change to so Langhe Nebbiolo? Who like was there a movement to like let's create something that is more for everyday drinking? Like was your father part of that wave, or when did that kind of evolution happen? Because I know even Barolo has changed, but like a Langhe Nebbiolo, you said it's good to go out the gate.
Yes. In the past, even Langhe Nebbiolo had a stronger style.
Okay.
So it was more powerful structure. It was more difficult to drink, especially with those tannins. My father started with my grandfather to age it only in stainless steel tanks. Because this is also quite particular, because still nowadays, I would say most of the wineries age their Langhe Nebbiolo in wood, less than the Barolo, of course, maybe only 1 year, but still they age it in wood. My father started aging it in stainless steel tanks, like the Dolcetto. In this way, he was really able to preserve the freshness of the grapes. And that's why you have a lighter style, more approachability, and also you can taste the grapes. Because without the influences of the oak, you can definitely taste the grapes. In a young wine, the wood, it's easy for the wood to cover everything. Because the wine is young, so it's not as powerful as a Barolo, and the wood takes over. He didn't want that. And thanks to the stainless steel tanks, he was really able to show this freshness, this approachability.
What is this like for you? Because I'm thinking about, you're the 5th generation, but like, and we talked about the Ferrari of pumps that you guys have. Like, what have you seen over your life? Like, how many changes have you seen? Like all this new equipment. Like, when you're a little kid, like, oh my God, they're delivering equipment. Like, has it gone from like you don't even recognize where you grew up a little bit?
It's for me. Well, for me, it's normal because I've always been in contact to new equipment, new tools. Every year, something different to try, to experiment, to work with. So for me, at the beginning, it was really like playing with all these new things in the cellar and in the vineyards. It was funny at the beginning. It was sort of exciting to try these things. I was playing with all these things, trying to make them work, the crushing machine, also presses, so many different kinds of presses. Or just think about the labeling machine, the bottling machine, so many things to play with.
Yeah, it's fun toys for a kid. What about what about your grandmother or grandpa? Were they like, did they look at like all this? What is all this new stuff? What are you doing?
Yes, especially for the old generation.
Yeah.
Especially because those machines are crazy expensive. They're really, they are huge investments.
Yeah.
But when they realized that they were useful,
Gotcha.
They were happy. Not at the beginning, because when you have your son who is really spending here and there, buying everything new and trying new things, and these equipments were from France, from Germany, not even from Italy, some of them, so even more expensive, but it was worth it. Yeah. And still nowadays it's doing that, my father, and my mother is struggling because she's saying all these new tractors, new machines, new everything. She's like, are you sure we need all of this like every year?
Oh man, yeah. Matter of fact, I'm glad you talk about your mother. We know about your dad, but talk about your mother. What is she? Does she work in the winery, or just we'll talk about your mother and what she does with you guys?
She's probably the real boss of the family. Okay. Like every Italian mama, every Italian mother. And consider that there's me, my father, and my mother is in the middle. So she's always there trying to mediate the things when my father and I are yelling at each other. It happens every once in a while, pretty much every day, but but in a good way. Let's say, when you're working together, living
Passion.
together.
It's passion,
Yes,
yeah.
and we're Italian,
Yeah, yeah.
so think about gestures and
I
yelling at each
know.
other. So
I-
no, she's
You need a series in the vineyard, and it's got to be in Italian. It has to be in Italian with, it'd be for American TV, but it'd be in Italian, and we'd have to subtitle it. It would just be great just to let you see you and your dad go at it.
That would be something. That would be something. My father actually always says, if we only had cameras filming what we're doing every day here, really, we would make such a crazy amount of money.
Right. So, I mean, they gave me a question here, but I don't have to ask it. You've just been like, what's it like working with your father? But also, during the, we found this article that Skurnik published said, where you said, my father is, and with love, is very stubborn. And that was regarding the spring of 2014, and I guess it was a rainy spring.
Yeah.
Right. But something great will come in 2024. What was that about? What was that prediction, Nostradamus?
We're talking about our Riserva vineyard,
Okay.
Bricco Voghera, which is a special wine which we don't make every year, but only in the best vintages.
So I should have some of this 2010.
And
right?
by chance, we have here nowadays
the last time you made it.
exactly the latest release, 2010. That's such a tiny production. The Riserva, we make 3,000 bottles only.
Okay.
It's our oldest vineyard, and it's also one of the oldest in the area. Though the oldest vines there are 120 years old. They produce nothing. They have 1 or 2 clusters each. The concentration is outstanding. They are like half the standard size, those clusters, with smaller berries, thicker skins. It's kind of scary when we crush these grapes during the harvest. There's almost no juice. It's just skins. It's just skins. And in 2014, which was a pretty tough year, because it was raining every day. It was very humid. A lot of producers, most of the producers were just complaining because it was so hard to work in the vineyards. When the soil is always wet, it's hard also to spray copper and sulfur to avoid the diseases. But my father, being so stubborn, he decided to actually invest a lot more time and money in the vineyards in order to be able to have a great result at the end.
That's a wow. That's a wow wine, by the way.
The Riserva is always so special.
Yeah. So he decided to invest more.
Yes, in 2014, rather than just, because some of the producers just decided to give up with the works in the vineyards. The most difficult years are always the most expensive ones, because they need more time, more money to be invested to make less wine. That's what we did, actually. The cost of production for us in 2014 was like the double,
right,
to make 50% of the wine. So not many people would do that. But we will release the Riserva 2014 in 2024 after 10 years. Normally, we do it for all our Riservas, 5 years in the barrels and 5 years in the bottles. And the 2014 Riserva is going to be outstanding. It's probably one of our freshest wines.
See, this is how you get invited back on the podcast. Oh, no. Talk about that, because that doesn't happen a lot in the United States and our wine industry, holding back. Even if someone does keep it in barrel for 5 years, then they're going to release it. I know that's done. The only place that I know of off the top of my head, a lot of the Spanish producers do that. They'll Vegas Sicily will hold shit for 30 years before they release it. Heritage Lopia, they'll hold things for like 15. Crazy. What? How did your you guys, how do you know when it's time to release it? Like it's just a minimum. It's 5 years in barrel, and then at least 5 years. Like, how does your dad? How do you and your dad ultimately? I know he makes decisions, but how do you and your dad come to that decision?
It's it always, of course, depends on the vintage, because every vintage, we always have such a variation of conditions in any vintage. But for sure, we wanted to have a longer aging for the Reserva, given the age of the vines.
Mm-hmm.
These vines are so old, and they have such a concentration, which really needs more time, both in the barrels and in the bottle, before the release. So that's why we came to this decision. Let's do 10 years minimum, so that the wine has enough time to evolve before being released. And we believe that 10 years is the ideal peak also to drink it. That's why when we release it, it's actually ready to
start
drink.
a drinking window. Yeah,
yes.
Gotcha.
Then, of course, you can age it for another 25
years.
years.
But that's like, because most people, if you released it, they're going to drink it.
Right. Exactly. And we want the wines to be ready when we release them. Not that you have to wait for, like the 2010, which we have released now, it's just gorgeous for me. And in the peak of this 10 years, at the peak, you really have this mix of still a lot of freshness. Like in your mouth, you have this acidity, which is very alive, very vibrant. But at the same time, you get some of the tertiary aromas, which are the aromas of the evolution, like dry fruits, dry flowers, also licorice, dark chocolate, white truffles. They're so intense. And my taste, I really like this fusion of both freshness and some of the evolution.
I'm same. I don't like wines that are too aged. I like them. It's hard to get, but like I like them right in the pocket, right? Like when it's still got that fruit and some freshness, but then those secondary and tertiary notes coming in. Because I'm sure you've been in the wine tasting, and the wine is just too old, and people are like wanting, because it's old. We got, it's 60 years old. It has to be good. So they're gonna talk about all the tertiary flavors. I'm like, ugh, that's not me. But so I like that. Like, it's right at it's at the start of the drinking window. Like,
yes.
We
actually have the same taste, MJ. I really like, if I can choose, I always tend to pick younger vintages. Of course, if I have the opportunity to taste something older, it's an experience, because especially for Barolo, the evolution is incredible. Even more so if it comes from my family, because I can taste the family history. But my taste, I really like the freshness of the new vintages, or at least in the 10 years range.
Speaking of from your family, you said there's bottles in there from 1930. What's the oldest vintage you've had from your family?
So this is funny, because I never had the oldest bottles, the 1932 bottles.
Okay.
My father never allowed me to taste them. I'm still waiting.
He's opened them and he didn't allow you to taste them?
I'm still waiting.
What?
I'm still waiting.
Child
I'm not old enough.
Somebody called DC DIFUS. Call Children's Services. That's cruel.
But he says, we have so few and we want to keep them. That's why that's the excuse.
He's like, we have so few.
Right. The oldest I've tried was from the early 40s, from my family. And it was really outstanding. It was completely different because, of course, the color of it was very orangish, garnet, almost no tannins, very earthy, mineral. Completely different, but I mean, it's almost 100 years old,
right?
So.
And that, like, that's like your great like, what is that? How do you feel when you're like, oh my god, this is my family? That's your family in a bottle.
It's really like tasting the family history. It's such an incredible experience to be able to taste something which was created by your great grandparents and it's still alive. It's really something which another wine from another winery, of course, wouldn't be the same emotion. Because and also being able to have those bottles and to taste them nowadays, it's something which I don't know if many people will be able to have this opportunity.
So your dad, Luigi, also. He's kind of a pioneer. He was one of the first people to look beyond Castiglione Falletto. He bought land.
You learned it.
I did. You broke me down. He bought land in San Rocco in the early 1990s, and additional land purchases followed. And I want to say Margheria. Margheria, okay. And Bricco Voghera,
yes.
and Serretta.
Yes.
And you actually said there's an energy in Serretta due to the microclimate and soil, and that Serretta represents what is history of your family. Talk about what that microclimate, that soil, that mix, what that we got quotes from you.
I'm glad you're talking about Cerretta, MJ, because Cerretta is our new baby.
Okay.
It's our new Barolo, which my father decided to dedicate to the 100th anniversary of our winery a couple of years ago.
Okay.
It's been really a labor of love, which took 30 years in the making. It's funny because Cerretta is a new wine, but not a new vineyard. My father and my grandfather were able to buy the Cerretta vineyard in the early 90s, in 1992.
Okay.
The vines were already planted. They were already there. But let's say the previous owner wasn't really doing a good job. They were not in the best conditions, the vines. And my father, being a really terrible perfectionist, as I said, he decided to replace the entire site completely, which was a crazy decision. It's pretty big. It's almost 3 hectares,
Okay.
which for the size of our winery is big. And so we're talking about replacing more than 12,000 vines. At that time, all by hand, one by one, planting one by one all the vines. My father and my grandfather. My father still has pain in his knees. He still remembers, planting these vines. It was crazy, really. And also there were particular vines which my father produced through muscle selection from the best vines in our Bricco Fiasco vineyard, our historical vineyard. So also the clones were selected through our genetic materials of our older plants. It was really a particular work. He also decided to add a drainage system to the soil, which wasn't present before. New poles, new wires, everything from scratch. But then the vines were too young for my dad to make a single vineyard Barolo, of course.
Right.
So he would never make Barolo from vines which are younger than 30 years old. So for the first 10 years, he decided to declass the Cerretta grapes into the Langhe Nebbiolo. Not even Barolo Classico at the beginning, Langhe Nebbiolo. After 10 years, he used the Cerretta grapes in the Classico, in the Barolo Classico, for 20 years. Now, finally, after 30 years, he was like, we cannot wait any longer. Let's release Cerretta. And so that's why he decided to dedicate it to the 100th anniversary, because it really represents the historicity, the patience, the hard work, the willpower of my family. And he's so proud. It's like another child for him. Cerretta and I grew up...
So you're not an only child.
Cerretta and I really grew up together. She's like my sister.
I love it.
And my father cares so much about Cerretta, not really about me, but... I'm quite jealous, actually. But,
yeah, he seems more patient with Cerretta than he is with
for
you.
sure. I mean, 30 years.
She gets a lot more slack than you.
Yeah, not many people would do that. Not many people. I mean, 30 years. Also, from a financial point of view, it's a crazy wait. And because he just wanted to have older vines, to have more approachability, more structure at the same time, more finesse, and a better ripening.
Yeah.
And I always find Cerretta to be our, I would say, most energetic Barolo, most vibrant. I can feel the energy coming from the younger vines. And it's also, for me, our freshest Barolo. I can always taste these herbs, mint, menthol, orange peel, which are so striking to me. It's always very sleek.
Very nice, very nice. So, I mean, you've worked. I mean, you work in the vineyards. done any work in the cellar with your dad yet?
Yes, I started.
Okay, so yeah, so
I started.
you're in the cellar.
No, I started 10 years ago, let's say.
Yeah, so you were in the
Finally.
cellar. You're over here in New York City doing sales and marketing. Is there a favorite aspect of the business you have? I mean, it doesn't really matter because you're an only child, so you're gonna have to do all this shit.
Exactly.
Anyway. But
That's the
as
story.
I thought about, I'm like, it doesn't really matter what you like. Like when it's your gig, it's just your gig. But is there something you really enjoy? I mean, what gives you the most enjoyment out of that? Obviously, I can tell there's a totality, and you have a deep respect for your family and history. But like right now, at this point in your life, is there something what do you enjoy the most that you're doing?
Well, I really like the fact that every day is like a different job. Because really, one day I'm in the vineyards, one day I'm in the cellar, one day I'm traveling or in the tasting room. So I really like this kind of variation. I never get bored. It's always like running here and there, and I like that a lot. I wouldn't like, I think, to be focused only on one field.
Okay.
I wouldn't like that at all, even if it would be much easier because you will be just focused there, so much easier. But that wouldn't be really my taste. If I had to choose, for sure, it would be vineyards, what I like the most, which is actually the hardest part of our job, really the most, the toughest. But probably, I think, since I started working there full-time in the vineyards only, that's probably my first love with our job. And I like to be, in the vineyards with these crazy old vines. I really enjoy that.
Yeah.
And it's also very satisfying in the vineyards to work there because at the end of the day, after an intense work of those hills, which are so steep, it's very, very intense. You turn back and you can see what you have accomplished. So it's very satisfying and rewarding at the end of the day to the fact that you can really see what you have done.
Yeah, that's great. So what do you see in your future and your family's future and the next generation when you have a son?
Don't start because my parents are really pushing for the sixth generation.
Like, You are really Italian. Like they are on you, man.
They're pushing for the sixth generation so much. But just for the winery, not for the family.
No, exactly. I mean, no. I think Mom wants some grandkids, but Dad just wants to make sure. He's like, I need to be around to guide this other kid so this one doesn't screw it up. But like there's so much going on, like where would you like to see the wines of your family going?
That's tough because my father, my grandfather have always been considered among the best Barolo producers in the world by the Italian press, the international press. Yeah. So that's why I say
heavy is the head that wears the crown.
I have extremely big shoes to fill. And it's going to be, I think, very tough to go higher than my dad to ameliorate what he has been doing for his entire life. Because he, as I said, he's so paying attention to any small detail that it's so hard to go to do better than him. Really, he's paying so much attention, but anywhere, vineyards, winery, sales, that it's not easy to really do better. I'll try. We'll see. We'll see what's gonna happen.
We will see. And obviously, you're a lover of all things Piedmont.
Sure.
But if was there a bottle of wine, say in your travels, like, is there a bottle of wine that, like, I mean, obviously we talked about, dude, you can't touch like a bottle from the 1940s. That's your family. But like, and during your travels, is there a bottle of wine where you're like, oh wow, damn, that's actually really good wine? Is there a wine that kind of like knocked your socks off?
That's a good question. because I had the opportunity during my travels to taste and to drink so many wines from like almost so many different wine regions from all over the world, different grape varieties. We're always also with my friends, producers, always comparing, tasting different wines. That's what we really enjoy to do. I think I still have to drink a wine which blew my mind.
Okay.
I still have to drink it.
Yeah.
I mean, I had the opportunity to taste incredible wines. Some of them very rare to find, some of them impossible to buy from private collectors. I have many good friends who are collecting wine, which is important.
Yeah.
But I think I still have to drink that wine.
Yeah.
Also because I'm, like my father, very demanding. I have my taste. So,
You know what they say, man. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
Exactly. That's why I cannot blame him. We're so similar. We're so similar.
Oh my God, that was awesome! I can't believe time's up, Lorenzo. Wow, man. Thank you for coming in after a long day in the market and just sharing about your family's history, the wines, the history of your region. The foods, everything you share with us. Thank you for being so generous.
Sure. Thank you, MJ. It's been we had a great time. We had fun.
Listen, that's the only reason why I do. If it's not fun, So I had a great time.
And now you can pronounce Castiglione Falletto in a perfect Italian accent.
Exactly. You know what I'm doing? And I'll tell you what, I'm doing an IG live with my friend, and I'm just gonna say it. We're actually gonna be in Tuscany. I'm like, whoa. I learned some Italian yesterday.
I love that.
Castiglione Falletto. Tell everybody where they can find you on social media, find out about your family's wines, what websites, where they go.
We have our official website of the winery, azelia.it. And then you can find me on Instagram, my name, Lorenzo Scavino, Azelia. So you can stay updated on what we're doing in the vineyards, in the cellar, and everywhere.
Fantastic. We'll make sure we put that in the show notes. Again, thank you so much for coming in. All you listeners out there, don't forget to check out the show notes for each episode. That's where you're going to find information on the wine we drank. He had a whole grip of wine. I couldn't even bring them all out. We'll put his social handles, and we'll put their website so you can see everything that's going on there. And until the next time, to all my mavericks, my philosophers, my deep thinkers, and, of course, my wine drinkers, it's your boy MJ. Peace.